A lot of the problems in what we have called scalability in the past has really been all about raising as much money as possible and throwing as many people as possible at a problem. But really, it's sort of like we're Zerg rushing the problem zone. We're just a meat wave attacks, if you want to think of it that way, on business problems by throwing money and people at it. And then what happens, of course, is that maybe we accomplish a goal, but it's not sustainable. It's not truly scalable. We end up losing a lot of people. We cut their tasks because we're making people do things that are not really scalable.
Presented by Zapier, the AI automation company.
Hello and welcome to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast, the show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that could fit around a dinner table. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and on today's podcast, we're going to continue our discussion of what leverage-first scaling really means for small teams, and I'm going to share some of my own personal experiences having built a few multi-million-dollar companies with very small teams, and share with what that means and some of the roadblocks that I ran into, and also some of the things that I learned along the way, which is why I'm so focused on why I believe that now really is the time for small teams to be able to punch way above their weight. This is not a story, everybody talks about how AI and automation is a story about getting rid of jobs, and I don't believe that's the case. I think that we're in this point where people believe that tools and technology, machines can replace the roles of people, but actually really what we're thinking about is machines can do the tasks that people have been doing that are really better for machines, and that people should be focusing on the tasks that are really better for humans. And the more that we can make people do what people do best and machines do what machines do best, the more that we can actually grow things and build things that are not only scalable, but sustainable. A lot of the problems in what we have called scalability in the past has really been all about raising as much money as possible and throwing as many people as possible at a problem. But really, it's sort of like we're Zerg rushing the problem zone. We're just a meat wave attacks, if you want to think of it that way, on business problems by throwing money and people at it. And then what happens, of course, is that maybe we accomplish a goal, but it's not sustainable. It's not truly scalable. We end up losing a lot of people. We cut their tasks because we're making people do things that are not really scalable. And so we're at this moment now where we could start thinking about, well, can we really optimize for what people are good at and optimize for what machines are good at? Let teams grow from a sustainable base, small but mighty. And as each person is contributing much more than just their individual time, much more than their just individual labor, they can accomplish more. And each person actually becomes more indispensable to the organization. So in the last episode, I spent some time talking about the issues that I ran into when I was building ZapThink, which was a $2 million ARR company with just two people, and we were acquired for cash. It was a pretty good deal all around. But I really ran into a lot of scaling limits. Part of the reason why we sold was because we were running into the limits of what two people can do. As we talk about, there's a difference between grinding and scaling. Grinding is you do whatever it takes to get to that first million. And maybe many of you listening to this podcast, you're still trying to get to that first million, in which case you have to iterate. You have to figure out what products are right. You have to figure out what markets are right. You have to still figure out who your ideal customer profile is, what the product market fit is. And in that first million, you're kind of doing anything it takes to get your business off the ground, to find that match. But then as soon as you get to that million point, you've found something that resonates, something that works. Now, the thing that differentiates the grinders from the scalers is the grinders continue to do those activities that got them to their first million to try to get them to the second million. And if you're working so hard to get that first million, you're going to work twice as hard to get to that second million. That's not scaling. That's just throwing more work, more labor, more effort against a problem. The smart way to do it is to realize that, hey, you figured out the core of what your business is, the core of what you're offering to get you to $1 million. But now you need to really work on those processes, those systems, the leverage aspects, so that you can not only get to 2 million, but to 3, to 4, to 5, to 10, to 20, to 50, whatever the natural limit is, your desired limit of where you want to be when you grow your business. And if you notice, I talk about your desired limit, because if you're listening to this as a founder of a small business, small, medium-sized business, maybe you've already got to the $1 million, $2 million, even $3 million point. If you haven't raised a lot of money, then your growth ambitions are your growth ambitions. They're how big do you want to get? How sustainable do you want to be? How much effort do you want to put into it? The difference is that if you've gotten to that first X million because you've raised a lot of money, then basically your customer is really your investor, because your investor wants to grow their value of the equity they have in your company. And in many cases, the product of your business to the investor is not the product that you might be selling to your customers. The product of your business to the investor is your equity, is the value of your shares. They don't even care necessarily what you're selling, how much you're selling it for, how many employees you got. As long as you're increasing the value of their shares, that's all that matters. You could be selling nothing, and NFTs, whatever. And you could be increasing the value of that thing as long as you're providing value to your investors. But that's not the scaling game we're playing here. We're talking about leverage for scaling that allows you to grow to the limits that you want to grow to, the limits that maybe the market allows you to get to, without doing all this artificial stuff, throwing money and people at problems out of what are fundamentally perhaps unscalable things. So I want to get into this a little bit. I want to talk about this. Let's think about past that first million. You've already established the value. You've established your product market fit. You found your ideal customer profile, and you're out there building and selling and delivering. So you may even have grown past that million to 2 million, maybe to even 3. And as part of that, maybe you've done a lot of the grinding way of growth. You've hired a team, 5 people, maybe 10 people, maybe 15 people. And as you may have heard from some of our previous interviews, the metric that we really are interested in the most, the leverage metric, is very related to revenue per employee, measurements per person, output per team member. And the thing that differentiates grinding and scaling is that in grinding, as you increase your revenue, whatever that metric is per employee or team member goes down over time. Basically, you're working harder to get to that next incremental bit of revenue, which means perhaps your revenue per employee is going down because you might need to hire more people to get to more revenue, but the people you're adding are not linear. You're adding people at a greater cost because you need to get that next bit of revenue, but the juice that you're getting out of every squeeze is less and less with every hire. Or perhaps you're measuring output per team member and you're adding more people, and all of a sudden you start adding people that are not necessarily responsible for producing output, but they're responsible for managing other team members, right? Perhaps because the team has gotten to that point where you can't manage them because you're busy doing other things, so you have to hire someone to manage parts of your team. And of course, that person impacts the total output of the organization because you have to include them in your calculation. They're part of the team, but that team member is not producing output, so your output per team member, your revenue per employee goes down. So this is sort of the first indication that we don't have an organization of high leverage. Your revenue may go up, your outputs may go up, but your performance per team member is going down. And part of that, as we talked about with the last issue, is that you may still have a bottleneck. There may still be you or the person who's in charge of the operation is responsible for all of the decisions, for all the major decision making, even perhaps for strategy and for dealing with partnerships and dealing with product direction, right? And the thing about that is that you can't really hire your way out of that problem. If you do, what you're doing is you're shifting responsibility to somebody else. You're just moving the bottleneck or changing the shape of the bottleneck. So we need to really think about how do we get out of this founder bottleneck problem or leader bottleneck problem that is causing a real issue. So as I mentioned last time, I told you about my ZapThink experience, building ZapThink to around $2 million in annual revenue. This is not a run rate. This is the actual revenue with just 2 people and 70% plus margins. And I told you what I got wrong about leverage. And here's what I really got wrong, which is that I thought the answer to the next bit of growth was hiring or contracting more. I thought the bottleneck was not having enough people, not having enough hands. And that if I just had more people, the bottleneck would disappear. But it doesn't, because if you're running a company at around $3 to $5 million in revenue with 5 to 15 people, you kind of are already starting to feel this. You already know this. The pattern goes like this. You've hired people that you needed. The work gets done. Perhaps the clients are happy. and perhaps even revenue is growing. But every decision that actually matters, pricing, positioning, which markets to pursue, whether or not to invest in a new product line, expansion opportunities, every one of those decisions still runs through you, through one person. And not because necessarily you wanted to, but because the systems that you built were built for execution, not for leverage. So you hired people to do more work, to execute on the business, but you didn't build systems that multiply what each person produces. That's the leverage bit. A little bit of leverage on the way in produces a huge amount of output on the way out. So you end up in this really strange place, which is that you have a team, but you're still the constraint. And that constraint constrains your ability to scale, at least in any sort of sustainable way. So the team runs the business, but you drive it. And every day this happens, every week, every quarter. So I want to explain a little bit why hiring itself isn't the lever, isn't the thing you're going to get leverage with. What you need to think about is, what is the mechanism by which we achieve increasing levels of scale in a sustainable way that is not dependent on team size growth. So at Scalebrate, we talk a lot about leverage in 4 dimensions. We talk about leverage, which is the ability to put a little bit of effort in, a little bit of input, and produce a huge amount of output on the way out. We have 4 things that we can do to gain that leverage. One, of course, we can do systems, which include both technology systems and process systems. We could think about ways of multiplying individual output so that the work that we do itself gets multiplied. We could think about the architecture, the systems that we set up in terms of revenue and other things. And we could think, of course, about time, because time is one of those things that we can't miraculously create more of. And as a matter of fact, when we hire people, that's really what we're trying to do. When we hire people, we're trying to increase time, because a person is just naturally limited to how much work that they can produce in a certain amount of time, if they don't have any leverage, that is. And so if we don't have leverage and a person can only produce, say, 8 hours of output a day, whatever that measure is, then if I want to get 16 hours of output, if I don't have leverage, I got to hire another person. That's how I gain that time leverage. But we can accomplish time leverage in other ways. What can I do with my 8 hours so that I'm actually accomplishing a lot more, or make it so that I can recover X amount of hours out of that 8 hours, and now I have more time, right? That's the time leverage. This is what we call the leverage framework. So here's what we measure in each of these dimensions. In systems, we think about, have we documented the core processes that are responsible not only for operating the business, but helping us grow the business? Have we properly automated aspects of those processes where people don't need to do the delivery? And of course, with AI, how do we involve intelligent systems that may be able to offload some of the cognitive load that we may be doing on a daily basis? Handling inbound emails, processing documents, doing analysis, whatever it is that we need to do that's necessary but can be reliably offloaded to a machine to do. Or things that are even just stuck in people's head, so that whenever something needs to happen, when you always need to ask Jane or Bob or Jimmy or whatever it is, because we don't know how it's done, it's never been documented, and therefore that's a constraint on growth, that's a constraint on scale. So one of the first things we need to think about in systems is systematizing things, getting things out of people's heads. The next thing we need to talk about, of course, is multiplying team output. Now, machines are really good at producing average output, right? But if people are producing average output or below average output, they're not performing better than a machine, which means that we can get machines to do what their people are doing at an average or below average level. Now, I'm not saying we need to fire people. It's just that when you look at the things that you do over the course of a day, over the course of your work time, some of it is high value output. And these are things that maybe only you can do because you need to apply creativity. Maybe it's about building relationships. Maybe it's about strategizing. Maybe it's about synthesizing, whatever it is that you're really good at. But perhaps 50 to 60 to 70% of your day is spent on things that are not really things you're really good at. Putting things into slides, writing documents, designing things, sending emails, whatever it is. And maybe you're below average or average. Well, machines can do those things. So when you think about how each person is producing above average output, because we want everybody to produce above average output, that's how we gain leverage here. And instead of adding headcount, which is really about masking inefficiency. The next thing we need to think about is, of course, the aspects of the business where this architecture of the business and structuring it such that it is recurring and it is scalable, and that the investments that we make don't require proportional effort. So we could talk about revenue architecture or systems architecture so that we can grow in ways that are not just linear. If I put in the same amount of inputs, I get the same amount of outputs, or even worse, sublinear, where I put them in and over time I'm getting decreasing economies of scale. And of course, the last little bit here is about time, but also time autonomy. We think about maximizing time, talked a little bit about recovering some of that time so they can use that time for other things. And it's a kind of a nice little loop here, because every single time we invest in systems that help us recover time, we gain more time. And with that time, if we can invest some more of that time into recovering more time, we really get to this optimal place that we want to be. Of course, nothing is static. Markets change, customers change, products change, everything changes. So we can't just set it and forget it, but we can get to a point where we have systems that allow us to operate that way. But also, we could think about completely autonomous systems. We could think about aspects of the business that can operate without you, without anybody touching it for a week or for longer. And this allows us to focus on the high value thing. So when we hire without improving these 4 dimensions, we're not scaling, we're just adding additional labor or additional cost or additional inputs. So we're trying to maximize outputs, not maximize inputs. So we may have solved execution drag, which is maybe over time we got better and better at delivering the thing because we figured out how to deliver it better. We have templates in place, whatever we have, but we still have created a lot of drag when it comes to processes, decisions, all that sort of stuff. And more people actually makes things much worse. More people means more decisions, means more coordination, more handoffs, more review cycles, more of your time spent coordinating instead of high value activities. And the coordination costs, that's where things really start to make things sublinear, so that you're increasingly grinding harder and harder just to get to those same outputs or to grow those outputs. So as mentioned, this bottleneck that you may have had, maybe in the beginning was just you'll find that the bottleneck in an organization that grinds and doesn't scale doesn't disappear, just moves. It went from you doing the work to you deciding what work to gets done, and somebody else still doing that work. So here's what makes this worse. At $3 to $5 million in annual revenue, the decisions become bigger. You're not deciding perhaps which email template to send. You're deciding whether to pursue a $500,000 contract that would represent 15% of your revenue. And if it goes sideways, it could take your focus off everything else, the other 85% of your business. So these are not decisions that you can batch, and they show up honestly sporadically, sometimes at random, and they carry real weight, and they can't be delegated to someone else who doesn't have the full picture. So think of it this way. If you're spending your time grinding, you're doing all this time just to keep the business going and growing, and all of a sudden this new thing comes in out of the blue, like a $500,000 deal, and you haven't systematized, you haven't leveraged, you're going to end up taking your foot off the gas of the rest of the business so that you can afford to pursue the other part that's the opportunity. And I think that's an issue. You don't want to have to choose between, do I pursue this opportunity or do I keep the gas on the rest of the business? And part of that's because we are not scaling effectively. We're just grinding. So staying in the middle of everything is not a good place to be, because not necessarily because you're a control freak or micromanaging. That's how people see it. And certainly there are people who like to do that, who love to have their finger in every pie and love to be control freaks and really get in there. But a lot of times it's out of necessity, because there's no systemization, there's no autonomization, there's no ability for anybody to be able to do things autonomously. Maybe there's a lack of trust, in which case the manager needs to think about that, because you're not going to scale if you can't have trust. You need to trust people and you need to trust systems. And if you can't trust the systems or the people, you end up doing a lot of that work yourself out of fear that things won't happen. That's not a good place to be. We're not here to run an emotional business. We want to really run a well-oiled systemic machine. So we have to have trust. But to get that trust means that we need to reliably offload things to say, oh yeah, this is done in a way that even somebody who comes into this new will be able to execute this at the desired level of effectively, at the desired levels of scale. Or if we offload this to machine, we have confidence in the machine's ability to do that. So this is what we want to be we want to be in this place. It's all about confidence. It's all about growing scalably. It's all about not having your finger in every pie, either because you want to or because you need to. So we need the systems to be built in the proper way, not assuming that hiring is the answer to every problem, because it isn't. The answer in the small team, high leverage case, of course, is leverage. So let's talk a little bit about what this leverage for scaling really looks like. This sort of mental reframing for how a small team operates highly efficiently in this era of AI and automation, where if you're not operating this way, other people will. And I think that's the biggest thing to think about. We're no longer in a position of luxury where we're like, well, maybe we'll do things in a highly efficient way, autonomously or not autonomously, use AI tools, not use AI tools, use automation, don't use AI automation, because we're in a place where building is easier than ever before. Somebody who wants to build something now can just point their favorite vibe coding tool or LLM at a problem, and boom, you'll have a solution. There's no resting on any laurels. Nobody is safe anymore. The only thing that you are safe with is if you have an established relationship with customers, if you have an established partnerships with channels, if you have some sort of incumbency that gives you an advantage. But if you're not able to effectively manage it, it will erode over time and you'll lose all of those advantages. So really, we're not at this point where you can afford to conveniently exclude yourself from the markets that we are in. So I want you to really get into this mind frame here, that the question I want you to think about is that what if the bottleneck at this $3 to $5 million range isn't a hiring problem? It's not about getting more people, getting better people, getting different people. Maybe if you don't have enough people, then yeah, sure, you can add a team member or two, but that's not the solution to your overall problem. The overall problem is a leverage problem. So let me explain what I mean by leverage for scaling if I haven't really explained it clearly in this episode or the previous episodes, because this is something new for most organizations. Most founders scale like this. They think the business needs to grow in a particular way. So let's just think in terms of revenue. Like, we're generating a certain amount of revenue, we need more revenue. And the usual thought is in order to generate more revenue, we need more capacity in some way. Either we need more people doing delivery, we need more people selling, we need more people marketing, whatever it is, we need more of that capacity. And to address that capacity issue, we hire or we contract. We add more people to the problem because, as I mentioned, usually the gap is a labor issue, time issue, or a know-how issue, a learning, knowing how to solve that particular problem. But the thing is that that's thinking first in terms of headcount. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's a first mentality. It's headcount first. And it's intuitive because this is what people have been doing for hundreds of years, right? And at 3 to 5 million, you've already kind of like built a business, you already know how it grows. So it seems kind of easy. It's like, well, I know what got me here, so therefore it'll get me there. But as you know with this common expression, what got you here may not necessarily get you there. And this is what creates that founder bottleneck. And what ends up happening is that you sort of reach that limit. Maybe you can't find new people or you don't want to find new people. You get into some sort of rut. You get into this complacency and somebody new comes into the space who is able to execute so much better than you with a much more efficient team that now you're completely scrambled anyways. And now it's not about just hiring more people to do the same thing the way that you were doing it anyways. It's about rethinking things. So let's start by rethinking. Leverage first scaling really works differently because instead of asking first, who do I need to hire? You ask first, where can I multiply my output without multiplying my headcount? So let's go through those 4 dimensions to figure out how to do that. Systems. First of all, can I automate the various decisions that are being made, the various implementations that are being made? So not only does it need me as the bottleneck, but maybe it doesn't need the others either. We can figure out how to extract some of those urgent but not important things, or important and urgent things that are not allowing us to get to the really strategic things. Document the operating principles, take things out of people's head, put things into scripts, automate as much as possible, allow people to have autonomy in their own decision making as well. Give people the ability to do so within the acceptable framework, whatever the acceptable decision-making framework is, so that people do things in a collaborative way, right? You might say, well, what if people make the wrong decisions? Like, well, what if you make the wrong decision? I'm sure you don't always make the best decisions yourself. So people make good decisions, people make bad decisions, but it's all about how do you recover from bad decisions? How do you learn from bad decisions? How do you share learnings even of good decisions so that other people can become better? And as a team, you operate much more effectively. The second dimension, of course, is multiplying the output of your team. Can you get 2x, 3x, 4x, 10x from each person through better tools, clearer roles, smarter workflows, instead of hiring more people, right? If you can just optimize, then we don't have to solve our scaling problem first with hiring. The next thing, of course, is revenue architecture. Can you restructure the way that the business is operating, something about it so it compounds over time instead of requiring linear inputs? So, for example, things like recurring contracts and productized services and pricing leverage, or perhaps it might even be structured partnerships. Maybe you have to hire because you don't have expertise in an area. Is there a way to structure a relationship with a company that does have expertise in that area? I'm not talking about acquisition because you're just adding to your team and your cost again. I'm talking about some sort of structured partnership. Now, maybe perhaps there may be costs associated with that, but the costs offset the hiring costs. So you need to think about it in terms of a leverage game, not in terms of a cost game. You think about how you gain more output with less input. That's what leverage is all about. And then, of course, we need to think about time autonomy, which is, can you build decision frameworks and execution frameworks that let the team move not only without you, but without them, so they can focus on more things, the things that are going to bring in higher value. So this really isn't about hiring better people. It's not about implementing OKRs. It's not about putting people on PIPs. This is sort of like HR reactive nonsense, right? Those are tactical answers to what's really a structural question. The structural question is, can you build systems that multiply output instead of systems that require more input? That's the fundamental goal here. That's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to answer this question of how can we build sustainable scale, not just by throwing more wood into the fire, but by getting more heat out of the fire and making more of that heat to drive this engine forward. And at ZapThink, my previous business, I was the bottleneck because I hadn't really built leverage into any of those four dimensions. I was not really able to take advantage of new opportunities. I wasn't able to scale properly. The work just kept getting more grindy over time. It wasn't scaling. The business really ran on me and my partner, and it really wasn't a hiring problem because I didn't really have the leverage to begin with. So not having the leverage and just adding more people still means you don't have leverage. You don't magically get leverage by adding more people. And I see the same pattern in so many of these companies that are at the $3 to $5 million mark that haven't figured out scale. Now, the ones that have figured out scale get that linear or more than linear growth with the same number of people or with just minor amounts of new people. Dato CMS, for example, I talked to, I interviewed them. They're accomplishing some pretty remarkable amounts of growth with just a dozen or so people and several $1 million in revenue. And they're only working 30, 40-hour work weeks, and they're all happy about it. That sounds great. But I think this is accomplishable by most small teams that want to act in this new way where we have tools and technology in addition to established processes and practices to make everybody punch way above their weight. So let's talk a little bit about what we can accomplish here, because there's only so much we can do on this podcast, right? I've definitely been spending a lot of time doing these high-scale workshops with teams. So if you're interested in you're a small team within a large organization, or you're managing yourself a small, medium-sized business in that $1 to $5 million range, and you're looking to get to that next level, definitely reach out, because I've been doing a lot of 1-day, 2-day workshops where you can get a lot done in just a couple of days. And then, of course, an ongoing interaction to basically maximize your ability to scale with the team that you have. Everybody punches above your weight. Everybody's contributing greatly. People are not acting like robots. People are not acting like machines. Machines are doing what machines are great at. People are doing what people are great at. And you're able to respond and grow to whatever that natural level of scale is without any sort of external push. And so here's what I really want to understand more, because I want to hear from you. I want to understand and need your help with this. If you're running that organization or that team, that $1 to $5 million organization, or that small team operating within a big organization looking to scale, and you've shifted from that headcount, you're making that change. You're making that transition from thinking about people first to leverage first, or you're trying to, and you're hitting some walls. I want to hear your story. And whatever, not the version you'd post on LinkedIn, the real version, the one where you realize that hiring wasn't the first answer, right? The one where you said, like, hey, let's build a system. Let's build an automation. Let's build a template. Let's build an SOP. Let's think about the structure. And the one where you're probably still the bottleneck and you're starting to see that this is not a people problem, it's a leverage problem. Because, here's what I actually believe. The answer isn't that we're going to hire our way out of these problems. The answer is leverage. We're in this moment now, as I mentioned, where AI and automation is here to stay. It'll come in various different forms, but people have realized that one person now can accomplish so much. And if you don't believe that, look at all the one-person companies who are vibe coding entire tools, building huge things, and they're just one person, right? Imagine you can take advantage of that. You can tap into that. Not to necessarily build whole companies from scratch every day. That's what we're trying to do. But accomplish that same building is no longer the bottleneck. Creation is no longer the bottleneck. Content is no longer the bottleneck. So what is the bottleneck? The bottleneck are organizations who still put themselves too much in the path of control. We still have challenges of developing relationships, getting attention, building sustainable value. Those things haven't gone away. Maybe they're even getting harder now because there's so much noise out there. So what we need to build is sustainable organizations. We're not just hiring 1,000 people at a time to put out a fire and capture some market opportunity. And then once we realize we can't scale that way, we got to fire 80 to 90% of those people. That's unfair. That's a terrible way to grow. I think it's unsustainable. It's just like the Zerg rush, meat wave attack style of growth, which I don't think works. It doesn't work for large armies and it doesn't work for large companies anymore. So we need to think in terms of punching above our weight. Look what's happening out there in the world. Small companies and small countries are able to punch way above their weight by making much better use of technology, much better use of people. Every single person is highly valued. I don't want to get into too many analogies here, but we can kind of see that this is now the moment where small is beating large. And to do that, it requires a change of thinking, not just small companies trying to become big companies by hiring 1,000 people. It's not going to work. So this is sort of a mental change, I think, for most organizations. They're not used to this. And I think really need to think about leverage across all these dimensions. We'll talk more about these dimensions, about the patterns that work and the ones that don't. I'm still figuring it out like many of you because this is sort of new for this organization, but I've already been there. I've sort of seen it. I've seen what happens on the other side of it. And I want to really collect your stories. I really do want to hear from you. So I really wanted to reach out to you for those of you who are still thinking about to that founder who still thinks that they're trying to build a team by hiring their way out of it. This is sort of part of that mental mind shift. The mantra for the week is that the best way to grow is to maximize the output of each individual and to treat each person like a person and to treat a machine like a machine and to optimize for what everybody can do together in collaboration. So I want to hear from you, and I really want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Small teams that scale big aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode has you inspired to learn more, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's scalebrate.com. Until next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter, because small teams have mega potential. And thanks for tuning in to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast.